Well, Americans don't really understand this too much, but I mean, in the English system, class is class, money is money, and they're not the same thing.
So for nouveau riche, right? They still belong in a different class. It's just that you got more money, and then in a society, you're not really respected.
No, you're not. Money doesn't bring you respect in the UK. In Europe, I think it doesn't. Money doesn't earn you respect at all. It does in the United States. Right? Money, basically means that you've got liberties that other people don't have.
Yeah.
Right? You've got rights that other people don't have. And I mean that's I think one of the great things about America, right? You could say, you've just got to make it. And it doesn't matter how you do it. And I think that is really terrific. I think maybe they're losing that a little bit. I mean, they're losing as much as they're gaining right now. But in Europe, and particularly the UK, but I think it's true throughout sort of Western Europe, is class is history, is responsibility, is to some extent blood. Well, I hate to say that because that's not my. I don't care for that myself. And background makes a big difference. You're because we have royal histories,
right?
So if you are the Duke of Kent, right, you do get a better table in the restaurant. I mean, it's but because it's not about what I have, it's about my position in society. If you've got money in America, you can abscond from society and just not participate.
Right.
But class, in the European sense, or Western European sense, means that you occupy a greater position of respect in society because of your place and your contribution to society.
Contribution?
Yes, I think so.
In what way?
"40 years ago, my elder brother, my only brother, I'm using this as an example, to his great credit, I think he was 10 years old. He interviewed the oldest man in our village, and I lived in a small village called Roxton, in north of London, in a county called Bedford, Bedfordshire, and the word shire is the Anglo-Saxon word for county. And this is a village that had a Norman church, so we went back 1,000 years. Not much had changed in 1,000 years in this village. And this man, I think, was in his late 80s, early 90s, so he would have been born in 1870, I'm going to say, or
1870s.
Well, this would have been in 1975 or 6, I think, when the interview was done.
Okay.
So 1890s.
Right.
So he described his life and his relationship to the local squire. Now, the local squire was the landowner, who was a gentleman farmer. And what I mean by that is, the guy didn't have, he had a pair of boots that occasionally got dirty, but he took those off before he got into his Jaguar, right, and drove around the estate. And the farm workers who lived in homes that were owned by the farm would doff their caps to the landowner. So this man was educated and he was respected because he cared. His responsibility was to care for the village. And in this interview, this old man described how if there was a birth in the village, that the squire would send food, clean blankets, towels, and midwife, and he would pay for and take responsibility for the birth of the child. Something which is now the responsibility of the state. So it was built into the system that those people occupy the higher position in society because they had bigger responsibilities which they would fulfill. Now, the state has taken over all of those responsibilities. So money basically buys you distance from the state, but it doesn't buy you class.
So in another word, you're saying aristocrats like that, or people who occupy at a higher class in the society, they stabilize the society.
Yes, they contribute.
And can you say that the same thing is happening in the American South, in the right, like the pre-Civil War antebellum South, where
the Gone with the Wind era?
Yeah, and the plantation owners.
Yes.
Can you say that they provide such a stabilization force in the society, and therefore it's so contradicting with the North?
Absolutely.
And then that's where.
Yeah. It was. You're absolutely correct. It was an aristocratic system. Now in the US, of course, in the South or the North, or so it's a republic. So you don't have that sort of monarch at the top. There isn't anyone really at the top.
Right.
It's quite flat, but it is sort of feudal in that arrangement. After the Great War.
Second World War.
No. The Great War. This is the First World War.
Oh, okay.
When it was the first industrial war.
Yes.
First, and so, in Passchendaele or Flanders or Ypres, we were losing 40,000 men a day. Imagine that. So when we got back, and no one really won the First World War. The Germans were well, we won't go into it, but they never felt they surrendered, but no one really won that war. The idea was that because the local squire would have been the troop commander or the squadron commander, but he was there, right in the trenches. He suffered everything, and in fact, the reality is that that section of society suffered more losses, more deaths proportionately than the ordinary men. Yeah, which is I think is a surprise to people, right? Because we have this sort of image of what we call the kind of Blackadder version, which is that British sitcom where the generals had their sort of drinks cabinets in Paris, and they were ordering the troops, to sort of run into no man's land, but they were, sort of hundreds of miles away. Right, it wasn't really true. So after the Second World War, society flattened out, and then in Russia, the Russian Revolution occurred during the First World War. Yes. And I think it's for those reasons, because they weren't willing to, that the society had to level. Right. And China followed suit, in 1949, was it? 49? It started much earlier than that. They won the war 1949, and then they kicked the KMT. When did communism flourish? Really take over in China? I think it was 20s. No. 20s, 30s. That's when the whole. But Chiang Kai-shek was still. He was still one of the big warlords. Yeah, yes. Well, he really was the one who fought the Chinese. Japanese. No, but he commanded Chinese forces, didn't he? In Second World War. Yeah. So, it was 49. Mao took over and capture capital, and then 49 is 49. Officially. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's quite late. Yeah.